Ze'ev Jabotinsky, MBE, was a Russian Jewish Revisionist Zionist leader, author, poet, orator, soldier and founder of the Jewish self-defense organization in Odessa. With Joseph Trumpeldor, he co-founded the Jewish Legion of the British Army in World War I. Later he established several militant Jewish organizations in Palestine, including Beitar, HaTzohar and the Irgun. Family and early career. Jabotinsky was born Vladimir Yevgenyevich Jabotinsky in Odessa, Russian Empire, into an assimilated Jewish family. His father, Yevgeny Jabotinsky, hailed from Nikopol, Ukraine. He was a member of the Russian Society of Sailing and Trade and was primarily involved in wheat trading. His mother, Hava, came from Berdichev. Jabotinsky's older brother died in childhood. His sister, Teresa Jabotinskaya, founded a private, female secondary school in Odessa. In 1885 the family moved to Germany due to his father's illness, returning a year later after his father's death. Raised in a Jewish middle-class home, Jabotinsky was educated in Russian schools. Although he studied Hebrew as a child, he wrote in his autobiography that his upbringing was divorced from Jewish faith and tradition. Hava Jabotinskaya opened a store in Odessa selling stationery, and enrolled young Vladimir in the city's gymnasium. Jabotinsky did not finish school, having become involved in journalism. In 1896 he began writing articles for a major local Russian newspaper, the Odessa Leaflet, and was sent to Italy and Switzerland as a correspondent. He also worked with the Odessa News. Jabotinsky was a childhood friend of Russian journalist and poet Korney Tchaikovsky, and attended Tchaikovsky's 1903 wedding to Maria Goldfeld. Jabotinsky wrote under the pseudonym Altalina. His dispatches from Italy earned him recognition as an up-and-coming Russian-language journalist. He was a student at the Sapienza University of Rome Law School, but did not graduate. In the summer of 1901 he returned to Odessa and began working as a journalist at the newspaper Odessa's News. Later he edited newspapers in Russian and Hebrew. He married Johanna Galprina in October 1907. They had one child, Eri Jabotinsky, who later became a member of the Irgun-inspired Bergson group. Eri Jabotinsky briefly served in the First Knesset of Israel. He died on June 6, 1969. Zionist activism in Russia. Prior to the Kishinev pogrom of 1903, Jabotinsky joined the Zionist movement, where he soon became known as a powerful speaker and an influential leader. With more pogroms looming on the horizon, he established the Jewish Self-Defense Organization, a Jewish militant group, to safeguard Jewish communities throughout Russia. He became the source of great controversy in the Russian Jewish community as a result of these actions. Around this time, he began learning modern Hebrews, and took a Hebrew name. Vladimir became Ze'ev. During the pogroms, he organized self-defense units in Jewish communities across Russia and fought for the civil rights of the Jewish population as a whole. His slogan was, "Better to have a gun and not need it than to need it and not have it." Another slogan was, "Jewish youth, learn to shoot." In 1903, he was elected as a Russian delegate to the 6th Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland. After Theodor Herzl's death in 1904, he became the leader of the right-wing Zionists. That year he moved to St. Petersburg and became one of the co-editors for the Russophone magazine Yevreyskaya Zhyzn, which after 1907 became the official publishing body of the Zionist movement in Russia. In the pages of the newspaper, Jabotinsky wrote fierce polemics against supporters of assimilation and the Bund. In 1905, he was one of the co-founders of the Union for Rights Equality of Jewish People in Russia. The following year, he was one of the chief speakers at the Third All-Russian Conference of Zionists in Helsinki, which called upon the Jews of Europe to engage in Gegenwehrarbeit and to join together to demand autonomy for ethnic minorities in Russia. This liberal approach was later apparent in his position concerning the Arab citizens of the future Jewish state. Jabotinsky asserted that each one of the ethnic communities will be recognized as autonomous and equal in the eyes of the law. In 1909, he fiercely criticized leading members of the Russian Jewish community for participating in ceremonies marking the centennial of the Russian writer Nikolai Gogol. In the light of Gogol's anti-Semitic views, Jabotinsky claimed it was unseemly for Russian Jews to take part in these ceremonies, as it showed they had no Jewish self-respect. Military career. During World War I, he had the idea of establishing a Jewish legion to fight alongside the British against the Ottomans who then controlled Palestine. In 1915, together with Joseph Trumpeldor, a one-armed veteran of the Russo-Japanese War, he created the Zion Mule Corps, which consisted of several hundred Jewish men, mainly Russians who had been exiled from Palestine by the Ottoman Empire and had settled in Egypt. The unit served with distinction in the Battle of Gallipoli. When the Zion Mule Corps was disbanded, Jabotinsky traveled to London, where he continued his efforts to establish Jewish units to fight in Palestine as part of the British Army. Although Jabotinsky did not serve with the Zion Mule Corps, Trumpeldor, Jabotinsky and 120 Zion Mule Corps members did serve in Platoon 16 of the 20th Battalion of the London Regiment. In 1917, the government agreed to establish 3 Jewish battalions, initiating the Jewish Legion, as an honorary lieutenant in the 38th Royal Fusiliers. Jabotinsky saw action in Palestine in 1918. His battalion was one of the first to enter Transjordan. He was demobilized in September 1919. Soon after, he complained to Field Marshal Allenby about the British Army's attitude towards Zionism and the Jewish Legion. His appeals to the British government failed to reverse the decision, but in December 1919 he was appointed a member of the Order of the British Empire for his service. Jewish self-defense in Palestine. After Ze'ev Jabotinsky was discharged from the British Army in September 1919, he openly trained Jews in warfare and the use of small arms. On 6 April 1920, during the 1920 Palestine riots, the British searched the offices and apartments of the Zionist leadership, including the home of Chaim Weizmann, for arms. In a building used by Jabotinsky's defense forces, they found 3 rifles, 2 pistols, and 250 rounds of ammunition. 19 men were arrested. The next day, Jabotinsky protested to the police that he was the commander and therefore solely responsible, so they should be released. Instead, he was arrested and joined them in jail. The 19 were sentenced to 3 years in prison, and Jabotinsky was given a 15-year prison term for possession of weapons. In July, a general pardon was granted to Jews and Arabs convicted in the rioting. A committee of inquiry placed responsibility for the riots on the Zionist Commission, alleging that they provoked the Arabs. The court blamed Bolshevism, claiming that it flowed in Zionism's inner heart, and ironically identified the fiercely anti-socialist Jabotinsky with the socialist-aligned Zion Party, which it called a definite Bolshevist institution. Founder of the revisionist movement. In 1920, Jabotinsky was elected to the First Assembly of Representatives in Palestine. The following year he was elected to the Executive Council of the Zionist Organization. He was also a founder of the newly registered Keren Hazard and served as its director of propaganda. He left the mainstream Zionist movement in 1923. However, due to differences of opinion between between him and its chairman, Chaim Weizmann, and established a new revisionist party called the Alliance of Revisionist Zionists and its youth movement, Beitar. His new party demanded that the mainstream Zionist movement recognize as its stated objective the establishment of a Jewish state on both banks of the Jordan River. His main goal was to establish a modern Jewish state with the help of the British Empire. His philosophy contrasted with that of the socialist-oriented Labour Zionists, in that it focused its economic and social policy on the ideals of the Jewish middle class in Europe. His ideal for a Jewish state was a form of nation-state based loosely on the British imperial model. His support base was mostly located in Poland, and his activities focused on attaining British support to help with the development of the Yishuv. Another area of major support for Jabotinsky was Latvia, where his speeches in Russian made an impression on the largely Russian-speaking Latvian Jewish community. Jabotinsky was both a nationalist and a liberal Democrat. Despite his attachment to nationalism, he did not embrace authoritarian notions of state authority and its imposition on individual liberty. He said that every man is a king. Quote, he championed the notion of a free press and believed the new Jewish state would protect the rights and interests of minorities. As an economic liberal, he supported a free market with minimal government intervention, but also believed that the elementary necessities of the average person, food, shelter, clothing, the opportunity to educate his children, a medical aid in case of illness, should be supplied by the state. Literary activity. From 1923, Jabotinsky was editor of the revived Jewish weekly Rassvet, published first in Berlin, then in Paris. Besides his journalistic work, he published novels under his previous pseudonym Altalina. His historical novel Samson Azore, set in biblical times, describes Jabotinsky's ideal of an active, daring, warrior form of Jewish life. His novel Putero has been described as a work that probably has the truest claim to being the great Odessa novel. It contains poetic descriptions of early 20th century Odessa, with nostalgic portraits of its streets and smells, its characters and passions. Quote, although it was little noticed at the time, it has received renewed appreciation for its literary qualities at the start of the 21st century, being reprinted in Russia and Ukraine and in 2005 translated into English. Return to Palestine blocked by the British. In 1930, while he was visiting South Africa, he was informed by the British Colonial Office that he would not be allowed to return to Palestine. Evacuation plan for the Jews of Poland, Hungary and Romania. During the 1930s, Jabotinsky was deeply concerned with the situation of the Jewish community in Eastern Europe. In 1936, Jabotinsky prepared the so-called Evacuation Plan, which called for the evacuation of the entire Jewish population of Poland, Hungary and Romania to Palestine. The same year he toured Eastern Europe, meeting with the Polish Foreign Minister, Colonel Joseph Beck, the Regent of Hungary, Admiral Miklos Horthy, and Prime Minister George Tatarescu of Romania to discuss the evacuation plan. The plan gained the approval of all three governments, but caused considerable controversy within the Jewish community of Poland, on the grounds that it played into the hands of anti-Semites. In particular, the fact that the evacuation plan had the approval of the Polish government was taken by many Polish Jews as indicating Jabotinsky had gained the endorsement of what they considered to be the wrong people. The evacuation of Jewish communities in Poland, Hungary and Romania was to take place over a 10-year period. However, the British government vetoed it, and the World Zionist Organization's chairman, Chaim Weizmann, dismissed it. 2 years later, in 1938, Jabotinsky stated in a speech that Polish Jews were living on the edge of the volcano, and warned that a wave of pogroms would happen in Poland sometime sometime in the near future. Jabotinsky went on to warn Jews in Europe that they should leave for Palestine as soon as possible. There is much discussion about whether or not Jabotinsky actually predicted the Holocaust. In his writings and public appearances, he warned against the dangers of an outbreak of violence against the Jewish population of Central and Eastern Europe. However, as late as August 1939, he was certain that war would be averted. Plan for a revolt against the British. In 1939, Britain enacted the MacDonald White Paper, in which Jewish immigration to Palestine under the British Mandate was to be restricted to 75,000 for the next 5 years, after which further Jewish immigration would depend on Arab consent. In addition, land sales to Jews were to be restricted, and Palestine would be cultivated for independence as a binational state. Jabotinsky reacted by proposing a plan for an armed Jewish revolt in Palestine. He sent the plan to the Irgun High Command in 6 coded letters. Jabotinsky proposed that he and other illegals would arrive by boat in the heart of Palestine, preferably Tel Aviv, in October 1939. The Irgun would ensure that they successfully landed and escaped, by whatever means necessary. They would then occupy key centers of British power in Palestine, chief among them Government House in Jerusalem, raise the Jewish national flag, and fend off the British for at least 24 hours, whatever the cost. Zionist leaders in Western Europe and the United States would then declare an independent Jewish state, and would function as a provisional government in exile. Although Irgun commanders were impressed by the plan, they were concerned over the heavy losses they would doubtless incur in carrying it out. Avraham Stern proposed simultaneously landing 40,000 armed young immigrants in Palestine to help launch the uprising. The Polish government supported his plan, and it began training Irgun members and supplying them arms. Irgun submitted the plan for the approval of its commander David Raziel, who was imprisoned by the British. However, the beginning of World War II in September 1939 quickly put an end to these plans. Integrated state with Arabs. According to the historian Benny Morris, documents show that Jabotinsky favored the idea of the transfer of Arab populations if required for establishing a Jewish state. Jabotinsky's other writings state, "We do not want to eject even one Arab from either the left or the right bank of the Jordan River. We want them to prosper both economically and culturally. We envision the regime of Jewish Palestine as follows. Most of the population will be Jewish, but equal rights for all Arab citizens will not only be guaranteed, they will also be fulfilled." Jabotinsky was convinced that there was no way for the Jews to regain any part of Palestine without opposition from the Arabs. In 1934, he wrote a draft constitution for the Jewish state which declared that Arabs would be on an equal footing with their Jewish counterparts throughout all sectors of the country's public life. The two communities would share the state's duties, both military and civil service, and enjoy its prerogatives. Jabotinsky proposed that Hebrew and Arabic should enjoy equal status, and that, in every cabinet where the prime minister is a Jew, the vice premiership shall be offered to an Arab and vice versa. While in New York to build support within the United States for a Jewish army, Jabotinsky died of a heart attack on the 4th of August 1940 while visiting a Jewish self-defense camp run by Beitar. He was buried in New Montefiore Cemetery in New York in accordance with a clause of his will. A monument to Jabotinsky was erected at his original burial site in New York. In 1964, the remains of Jabotinsky and his wife, in accordance with a second clause of his will, were reburied in Mount Herzl Cemetery in Jerusalem by order of Prime Minister Levi Eshkol. Legacy and honors. Ze'ev Jabotinsky's legacy was carried on by Israel's Herut Party, which merged with other right-wing parties to form the Likud Party in 1973. Likud has since acted as Israel's main right-wing party, and has been part of most Israeli governments since 1977. His legacy has also been honored to a smaller extent by Herut, the national movement, Magshimi Herut and Beitar. In the United States, his call for Jewish self-defense has led to the formation of Americans for a Safe Israel and a Jewish defense organization. The JDO's training camp is named Camp Jabotinsky. In Israel, 57 streets, parks and squares are named after Jabotinsky, more than for any other person in Jewish or Israeli history, making him the most commemorated historical figure in Israel. The Jabotinsky Medal is awarded for distinguished service to the State of Israel. The Jabotinsky Institute, in Tel Aviv, is a repository of documents and research relating to the history of Beitar, the revisionist movement, the Irgun, and Herut. It is identified with Likud. Quotes, "Our habit of constantly and zealously answering to any rabble has already done us a lot of harm and will do much more. We do not have to apologize for anything. We are a people as all other peoples. We do not have any intentions to be better than the rest. As one of the first conditions for equality, we demand the right to have our own villains, exactly as other people have them. We do not have to account to anybody, we are not to sit for anybody's examination, and nobody is old enough to call on us to answer. We came before them and will leave after them. We are what we are good for ourselves. We will not change, nor do we want to eliminate the diaspora, or the diaspora will surely eliminate you." Quote, "A Jew brought up among Germans may assume German custom, German words. He may be wholly imbued with the German fluid, but the nucleus of his spiritual structure will always remain Jewish, because his blood, his body, his physical racial type are Jewish." It is impossible for a man to become assimilated with people whose blood is different from his own. In order to become assimilated, he must change his body, he must become one of them, in blood. There can be no assimilation as long as there is no mixed marriage. An increase in the number of mixed marriages is the only sure and infallible means for the destruction of nationality as such. A preservation of national integrity is impossible except by a preservation of racial purity, and for that purpose we are in need of a territory of our own where our people will constitute the overwhelming majority. Bibliography. Turkey and the War. London. T.F. Unwin. Limited. Samson the Nazarite. London. M. Secker. The Jewish War Front. London. T.F. Unwin. Limited. The War and the Jew. New York. The Dial Press. The Story of the Jewish Legion. New York. B. Hackman, Inc. The Battle for Jerusalem. Vladimir Jabotinsky, John Henry Patterson, Josiah Wedgwood. Pierre Van Parzen explains why a Jewish army is indispensable for the survival of a Jewish nation and preservation of world civilization. American Friends of a Jewish Palestine. New York. The Friends. A pocket edition of several stories, mostly reactionary. Tel Aviv. Reproduced by Jabotinsky Institute in Israel. Reprint. Originally published Paris. The 5A novel of Jewish life in turn of the century. Odessa, Paris. Jabotinsky translated Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven into Hebrew and Russian, and parts of Dante's Divine Comedy into modern Hebrew verse. The East Bank of the Jordan, a poem by Jabotinsky that became the slogan and one of the most famous songs of Beitar. Vladimir Jabotinsky's Story of My Life. Brian Horowitz and Amp. Leonid Katsas, eds. Detroit, Wayne State University Press, 2015.